9. Practicing in short bursts. In the early phases of practicing a new skill, it's very easy to overestimate how much time you've spent practicing. When you're no good, and you know it, time seems to slow to a crawl. And it feels like you've been practicing for a longer period of time than you actually have. The solution for this is to practice by the clock. Buy a decent countdown timer and set it for 20 minutes. There's only one rule. Once you start the timer, you must practice until it goes off. No exceptions. This simple technique will make it easier to complete longer periods of sustained practice, even when you get tired or frustrated. The more periods of sustained practice you complete, the faster your skill acquisition. Set aside time for 3 to 5 practice sessions a day, and you'll see major progress in a very short period. 10. Emphasizing quantity and speed. When you begin to acquire a new skill, it's tempting to focus on practicing perfectly, a recipe for frustration. Your performance, of course, won't be anywhere close to perfection. Instead of trying to be perfect, focus on practicing as much as you can as quickly as you can, while maintaining good enough form. First, ensure you're practicing using form that's good enough to satisfy your target performance level. Once you're practicing in good form at least 80 to 90% of the time, crank up the speed for faster skill acquisition. Learning. You can think of the checklist I just outlined as a way to intentionally make your personal learning curve steeper. The principles themselves are simple techniques that make the first 2 theoretical stages of the skill acquisition process, cognition and association, easier to do in practice. Once you start practicing something new, your skills will naturally and noticeably improve in a very short period of time. The trick is to start practicing as quickly as possible. Not thinking about practicing or worrying about practicing, but actually practicing. It's all too easy to feel like you're investing a lot of time in a skill without practicing very much at all. If you've wanted to learn something for a long time, you dream about being good at it, but you're hesitant to get started, you can spend years of mental and emotional energy without improving one bit. If you don't know where you're trying to go or don't have a solid strategy to get there, you can waste equal amounts of energy in unproductive wandering. These 10 principles are designed to help you eliminate this non-productive thrashing and replace it with activities that are fundamental to the skill acquisition process. The more time and energy you spend moving through the first 2 phases of the skill acquisition process and the less time you spend doing things that don't help you, the more quickly you'll acquire the skill. Simple as that. 10 principles of effective learning. Research the skill and related topics. Jump in over your head. Identify mental models and mental hooks. Imagine the opposite of what you want. Talk to practitioners to set expectations. Eliminate distractions in your environment. Use spaced repetition and reinforcement for memorization. Create scaffolds and checklists. Make and test predictions. Honor your biology. 1. Researching the skill. The intent of this early research is to identify the most important subskills, critical components, and required tools for practice as quickly as possible. The more you know in advance about the skill, the more intelligently you can prepare. The goal is to collect a wide body of knowledge about the skill as quickly as possible, creating an accurate overview of what the skill acquisition process will look like. For rapid skill acquisition, skimming is better than deep reading. By noticing ideas and tools that come up over and over again in different texts, you can trust the accuracy of the patterns you notice and prepare your practice accordingly. If you want to be able to bake the perfect croissant, pick up a few good books related to baking and pastries. Instead of reinventing the process, you'll find existing techniques that have been perfected over many years by the masters of the field. If you see the same technique or process described in multiple resources, chances are good it's important to know. Once you've found what appear to be the most useful techniques, you can experiment with them in your own kitchen, saving you a ton of trial and error. 2. Glance the concepts. Some of your early research will contain concepts, techniques, and ideas you don't understand. Often, something will appear particularly important, but you'll have no idea what it means. You'll read words you don't recognize, and see practitioners doing things you can't fathom. Don't panic. Your initial confusion is completely normal. In fact, it's great. Move toward the confusion. Drive. Stephen Krashen, the language acquisition expert I mentioned earlier, calls this comprehensible input. By default, the new information you're consuming isn't very comprehensible. since it's not connected to anything you know or have experienced. Over time, the same information will become comprehensible once you have some experience under your belt. Noticing you're confused is valuable. Recognizing confusion can help you define exactly what you're confused about, which helps you figure out what you'll need to research or do next to resolve that confusion. If you're not confused by at least half of your early research, you're not learning as quickly as you're capable of learning. If you start to feel intimidated or hesitant about the pace you're attempting, you're on the right track. Provided you're working on a lovable problem or project, the more confused you are at the outset, the more internal pressure you'll feel to figure things out, and the faster you'll learn. Not being willing to jump in over your head is the single biggest emotional barrier to rapid skill acquisition. Feeling stupid isn't fun, but reminding yourself that you will understand with practice will help you move from confusion to clarity as quickly as possible. 3. Identifying mental models and hooks. As you conduct your research, you'll naturally begin to notice patterns, ideas and techniques that come up over and over again. These concepts are called mental models, and they're very important. Mental models are the most basic unit of learning, a way of understanding and labeling an object or relationship that exists in the world. As you collect accurate mental models, it becomes easier to anticipate what will happen when you take a specific action. Mental models also make it much easier to discuss your experiences with others. You'll also notice a few things that look like something you're already familiar with. These are mental hooks, analogies and metaphors you can use to remember new concepts. The more mental models and mental hooks you can identify in your early research, the easier it will be to use them while you're practicing. 5. Talking with experienced people. Talking to people who have acquired the skill before you will help dispel myths and misconceptions before you invest your time and energy. By knowing what you can expect to see as you progress, you'll find it much easier to sustain your interest in practice and avoid becoming discouraged early in the process. 7. Using repetition and reinforcement. Spaced repetition and reinforcement is a memorization technique that helps you systematically review important concepts and information on a regular basis. Ideas that are difficult to remember are reviewed often, while easier and older concepts are reviewed less often. The best use of this technique is in instances where fast recall of information is essential. If you're learning common vocabulary words in order to acquire a new language, spaced repetition and reinforcement is valuable. In instances where fast recall isn't crucial, you're usually better off skipping the flashcards in favor of maximizing practice and experimentation time. 8. Using checklists. Many skills involve some sort of routine: setting up, preparing, maintaining, putting away, etc. Creating a simple system is the best way to ensure these important elements happen with as little additional effort as possible. Checklists are handy for remembering things that must be done every time you practice. They're a way to systematize the process, which frees your attention to focus on more important matters. Scaffolds are structures that ensure you approach the skill the same way every time. Think of the basketball player who establishes a pre-free throw routine. Wipe hands on pants, loosen the shoulders, catch the ball from the ref, bounce 3 times, pause for 3 seconds, and shoot. That's a scaffold. Creating scaffolds and checklists makes your practice more efficient. They also make your practice easier to visualize, which helps you take advantage of mental rehearsal, which can help with some forms of physical practice. 9. Making predictions and testing. Getting into the habit of making and testing predictions will help you acquire skills more rapidly. It's a variation on the scientific method, with 4 key elements. Observations: what are you currently observing? Knowns: what do you know about the topic already? Hypotheses: what do you think will improve your performance? Tests: what are you going to try next? I recommend using a notebook or other reference tool to track your experiments and form hypotheses as you practice. By keeping track of your predictions and generating new ideas, you'll have more fruitful experiments to test. 10. Resting. By setting your timer for 60 to 90 minutes before you start practicing or researching, it will be easier to remember to take a break when you're done. You can also split your practice into several smaller parts, with a short break in the middle if needed. 20 minutes of practice, 10-minute break, 20 minutes of practice, 10-minute break, etc. Why we don't practice? Why don't we practice? Simple. We're busy and we're scared. Shakespeare said it well a long time ago, in a play titled Measure for Measure. Our doubts are traitors, and make us lose the good we oft might win, by fearing to attempt. The major barrier to rapid skill acquisition is not physical or intellectual. It's emotional. Doing something new is always uncomfortable at first, and it's easy to waste a ton of time and energy thinking about practicing instead of practicing. Fortunately, the frustration barrier is deceptively easy to break through. Skill acquisition always feels bigger than it actually is. By creating time for practice, doing a bit of early research, and leaning into the initial discomfort, you will always see major progress in the first 10 to 20 hours of practice. All it takes to reap the rewards is a small burst of effort, persistence, and a bit of grit. You don't need to pick many skills to acquire. Just choose one. Take a skill on your want-to-do list and commit to trying it. Learn that language, play that instrument, explore that game, work on that project, cook that dish, create that art. It's easier than it feels. Pre-commit to practicing that skill for an hour or so a day for the next month. Once you actually start practicing, you'll always pick it up more quickly than you expect. Break it down. Make the time, try new things, and your brain will begin picking up the technique automatically. That's what brains do. When you get stuck or confused, test a new approach. Remember, once you start, you can't stop until you reach your target performance level or the 20-hour mark. Struggle if you must, but don't stop. Show your grit, and keep pushing forward. You'll get there. All it takes is practice. One final thought. The only time you can choose to practice is today. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Not next month or next year. Today. When you wake up in the morning, you have a choice. You can choose to invest your time.